The SEC's hope for 5 playoff teams took a little bit of a hit in week 1 with Texas A&M and LSU losing high-profile games in their season openers. No problem with Georgia. Georgia crushed Clemson and looks to be a deserving frontrunner for the national championship. Welcome into SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. As our listeners know, we take our duties seriously here on SEC Unfiltered as a purveyor of opinion. And John, I know you come into this podcast today in a somber mood. You take your reputation seriously, and you wanted to begin today's episode, I believe, with a public apology. So without further ado, I want to give you the forum to do that and get what you need to get off your chest.
I appreciate that, Blake. Yeah. A lot of people that do what we do, they throw stuff out there and then move on. It's like it never happened. As you know, I've never been that way. And it was some things I guess you could almost say I ridicule Vanderbilt. I don't think
that might be an understatement, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll use ridicule. I mean, I think people get the meaning of that. And even during the game when of course I wasn't watching that game, but when I would see the score and Vanderbilt's leading Virginia Tech 14, 17 points or whatever, I'm thinking, well, first thing I thought it was a typo. They just got the teams' names reversed, but they kept showing it, so I realized, no, Vanderbilt's really leading. And then my next thought was, well, they'll blow it in the end. And they did blow the lead, and they came back and won in overtime. And I just want to apologize for what I said, and I'm kind of on that Vanderbilt bandwagon now. I love watching the quarterback, Diego Pavia. I think he's transferred from New Mexico State, beat Auburn last year at Jordan House Stadium, 31-10 for New Mexico State. He's very athletic. He can run, throw it. I guess you got to go back to Jay Cutler to find a Vanderbilt quarterback that is effective as he is. So I know it's just one game, but I apologize for that. And I'm not even going to say anything about the stadium construction at Vanderbilt anymore, because kind of taking some cheap shots at how long it's taking. It's almost as though it's like a 20-year project. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to say any more about that. I just sum it up with an apology and a big old anchor down.
And there were almost 29,000 fans at the stadium on Saturday. I mean, just a huge crowd, almost 29,000 for this high-profile game against Virginia Tech. So really, I mean, you want this apology to be heard by all 29,000 of Vanderbilt fans who were there for this moment.
Yeah, I was guessing 13 fans would show up.
13,000 or 13?
No, 13.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, I was way off on that. And, yeah, kudos to them. Was there some kind of giveaway? I mean, I don't know what the situation is there at Vanderbilt. If it's free admission to their games, I've never looked into
free hard hats, I think.
Yeah, well, but even if it's free, I never can imagine. And I don't know, were there a lot of Virginia Tech fans there? Like I said, I avoided that game like the plague, but I don't know. Maybe there was some, but when I did show some post game, right at the end of the game, the celebration, there were a lot of Vanderbilt fans. I didn't realize there were that many Vanderbilt fans. So that's great for them. And that's going to really become I think a hostile SEC video.
You can't even get through it with a straight face.
No, I can do that. No, that's going to become a really hostile SEC venue in the future.
Okay. Well, this is really big of you, John. We could move forward now. You've cleared your conscience and apologized to Vanderbilt after years of ridiculing the Commodores. So that being said, we're going to move into some overreactions, or are they not overreactions? They're actually smart takes after week 1 of the season. So let's get into it, John. Let's just wrap up our thoughts on Vanderbilt. Guffaws aside, this was a damaging blow to Virginia Tech, they had been sort of a sleeper team, a playoff sleeper team coming into the season, loved by many in the national media as a possible contender in the ACC. Well, this doesn't go on their ACC resume, but I don't know that I like the Hokies' credentials as a playoff sleeper at this point. But how about Vanderbilt as a bowl team now, John? I mean, if you can beat Virginia Tech, you can probably beat Alcorn State this week. Ball State still on the schedule. I know you think highly of Georgia State. You think the world of that program, but a team that can beat Virginia Tech maybe can beat Georgia State. And so that's just the non-conference slate. Inside conference play, Vanderbilt has South Carolina at home in that menacing venue in Nashville. South Carolina didn't look too sharp and just barely hung on in a close win over Old Dominion. And then even if they beat South Carolina, they would need to find one more to get to 6. So smart take or overreaction on Vanderbilt being a bowl qualifying team this year?
It's an overreaction. And while I give Vanderbilt all the credit in the world for that win, quality depth is still what Vanderbilt lacks. It always lacks that. And I think it will have a really hard time over the course of a season. There will be attrition, and I don't know that the backups will be as good as the starters. There could be more of a drop off there, and haven't helped them if anything happens to the quarterback. So I still think it will be an overreaction. But I see right now, I see 5 wins for the Commodores. Going into the season, I saw maybe 1 or 2.
Well, let's continue down that road then, because if you're seeing 5 wins, I'm wondering if one of those will be against South Carolina. South Carolina, I mentioned, had just about all they could handle from Old Dominion at home in Columbia in their opener, won 23-19. Lenore Sellers, now the quarterback at South Carolina, he really struggled. Completed just 10 passes in that game. They were hoping, Sellers would be this dynamic dual threat quarterback. He did have some yards on the ground, and Rocket Sanders, the transfer from Arkansas, led the way in rushing. But overall, it was a pretty anemic offensive performance from South Carolina. And I thought this might be the case. Like, South Carolina in the past couple years has been the Spencer Rattler show and not much else. And you take Rattler out of the equation, and I thought it would be an even inferior product this year, and early returns are that it is. And as I mentioned, South Carolina will play Vanderbilt later this season. So overreaction or smart take, after 1 week and reevaluating our power rankings, overreaction or smart take, should South Carolina be number 16 in the SEC power ranking pecking order?
Yeah, I saw parts of every SEC game, and I would now rank South Carolina in pecking order. I would rank it 17th, actually.
Oh.
There, it's so far below the 15th place team in the league. I just happened to stumble upon a post-game interview with Shane Beamer, and he's Shane Beamer can be losing a game 56-0 and be over there on the sidelines, and he's kind of got that look like, yeah, well, you're up now, but we're coming, man. We're coming. Okay. Kind of got that cocky way about him that infuriates other fans. So he's doing this interview, and he's kind of upbeat. They've won the game. He's about to go celebrate a huge win over Old Dominion. But just as they break from the interview and the announcer turns to face the general populace and Shane Beamer goes to walk away, you just could see his whole face sag. It was like, okay, I put on that show, but we are absolutely doomed. Have you seen the rest of my schedule? We're done. It was
I saw that.
It was a Billy Napier look.
I saw that interview you're referencing, John, and it's like Beamer must have thought he was off camera about 2 seconds before he was. Yeah, he was all smiles discussing his win with the SEC Network on the field, and then the camera stayed with him shortly after the interview ended, and he just had this look on his face of, Oh my gosh, what are we getting into with the rest of this season?
Blake, I read in preseason about it, and you mentioned it. The quarterback, Lenore Sellers, obviously a good athletic player, a good runner. But the thing that had been impressed the coaches the most about him leading up to his first start was his accuracy. And maybe they were just saying that because they wanted him to be accurate. And if they just kept saying it long enough, he would be. But I think he was 10 of 13. And you're 10 and 13 against Old Dominion, you got problems in the SEC. So, yeah, that's not that's a smart take. That's not overreaction at all.
Yeah, 10 of 23, John. 10 of 23 for Sellers. Yeah. That is a 43-ish% clip. Don't think that's going to cut it. They need drastic improvement at the quarterback position. All right, well, before we get to sort of the brighter side of the SEC, let's stay down this road of cellar dwellers and touch on Florida. We heard some buzz around Florida. We contributed a little buzz around Florida in the preseason. I thought this roster would be better. I thought this would be Billy Napier's best depth chart he's had in 3 seasons in Gainesville. Didn't know if the record, the schedule's tough, but I thought the roster was in okay shape. Didn't look like it against Miami. Miami looked the part of ACC frontrunner, and Florida looked the part of a cratering program with an embattled coach. As you know, John, I laid out the case last week for Billy Napier to keep his job with an interim president. Just be good enough that the interim president can ignore what's going on over there in the football program. If week 1's any indication, I think it might get so bad in Florida this season that even with an interim president, even an interim boss is going to notice that the front porch of the house is crumbling. So, smart take or overreaction, Billy Napier not only will be fired this season, he will be the first SEC coach fired, meaning he'll be fired before Sam Pittman or anyone else in this conference. Is that an overreaction or is that a smart take in regards to Billy Napier?
It's a very smart take. I think he will be the first coach fired in the country. In fact, if Jeremy Foley was still the athletic director at Florida, he would have been fired after the Miami game. I don't have any doubt about that. You had all season to get ready for this. You talk about improvement. You talk about the better quality depth of your roster. This is the best team you've had. You got an experienced quarterback coming back, and you're playing at home. I know you're slight underdog, but one thing to lose, but to lose the way Florida lost, it looked like Miami brought in one of those teams from the late 80s or early 90s and just ambushed the Gators. And then it just got worse after that. Post-game press conference, Billy Napier looked as though right before he went out to meet the media, he looked at Billy, by the way, you're fired. We'll work out the details later in the actual day, because he had that look about him. And I just noticed about Billy Napier, you talk about it, and these are difficult times. You want to have the stiff upper lip. I don't think he has an upper lip. And just from watching, he also had a whole lot of problems trying to open that water bottle. I don't know if you saw that. And I have arthritis in my right hand, so I can empathize when you just pull it, and it's just locked on there. And so Billy tried to do it and couldn't pull it off. It was just a really bad look. And then he called out the fans, or singled out some guy in rural Florida in his basement criticizing the Gators. Don't listen to those kind of people. Yeah, that's your fan base. Don't listen to them. So, no, he's as good as gone. It's just when they want to do it. I think Scott Strickland, the AD's gone too. He hired him. He also hired and fired Dan Mullen. Man, that Dan Mullen era looks pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And Mullen was piling on a little bit after the loss. Mullen's broadcast partner at ESPN, Matt Berry, had a snarky tweet about how Mullen made New Year's Six Bowls in his first 3 seasons at Florida and was fired in year 4. And Mullen quickly retweeted Matt Berry's tweet. Mullen wasn't doing the tweeting, but he wanted to make sure that everybody saw that message from Matt Berry. So yes, I think Dan Mullen feeling a little salty still at being fired in year 4 at Florida after 3 straight New Year's Six Bowls. And I don't know that it was a bad decision. At the time, I thought it was the move that needed to happen at Florida. Mullen seemed to be kind of checked out on the idea of recruiting anymore. So, I didn't necessarily have a problem with the firing, but you got to get what comes next right, or you're going to be criticized for firing a guy who went to 3 New Year's Six Bowls. And it's evident Florida didn't get the next part right.
Florida's a long, long way from New Year's Six Bowl right now.
Mm-hmm. So the court you mentioned, though, and we'll get some more overreaction or smart takes to get to, John, but I want to finish up here on Florida and Billy Napier, because I mean the seat is past warm. It's hot now under Billy Napier at Florida, and we know what awaits on that schedule. It's a doomsday scenario for him in year 3. But you mentioned the situation with Scott Strickland, the AD. He's hired 2 coaches already. The cliche is a cliche because it's true. You don't often get to hire 3 football coaches at the same university if you've had to fire the previous 2. They don't give you that third chance. So, but I don't know if Florida is going to have time to change ADs, get a new AD in place to then get rid of Billy Napier before the end of the season. I mean, that's a bit of a time crunch. In normal circumstances, you could say, okay, it's not ideal, but maybe we'll have the president lead the coaching search. The president in a search firm will team up and lead the search. Well, you have an interim president, so I don't know how appealing that is. Here's an admittedly wild idea, John. If you know Scott Strickland's toast, but you don't have time to replace him as AD in time to make your coaching change, maybe you fire Scott Strickland, and then you mention Jeremy Foley. Jeremy Foley is the AD emeritus at Florida, one of those golden parachute jobs. But nonetheless, it means he's still, at least loosely affiliated with the university in this emeritus role. How crazy would it be to fire Scott Strickland? You don't get a new AD yet. You let that search play out over however long it takes. But if the moment comes where you have to fire Billy Napier, you fire Billy and you say, Jeremy Foley, you are now interim AD. You will lead this search until we get a permanent AD in place.
I don't like that idea. I love it. I think that's a great idea. And then you can just go get Urban Meyer, bring Urban back.
Yeah, Jeremy Foley, he hired some winners at Florida. You got to say that. And I mean, heck, make him earn his keep in his golden parachute role. It's like he's got the emeritus title. I mean, that should come with some duties, right? And I think Florida's moment of need, come off the bench and back cleanup.
Yeah, come be a hero for us. I think Jeremy Foley would love that opportunity. He's been out of it a while. He wouldn't have the day-to-day pressure of running an athletic department, juggling all these balls and dealing with TV contracts, all that other kind of stuff. All you got to do, Jeremy, is go out and hire a football coach. And so hire an Urban Meyer, not a Ron Zook. So, yeah, that would be I really like that idea. I don't know what Florida, and we talked about this before, but we know Florida fans are notorious front runners. Mm-hmm. What this is going to do to the attendance in the Swamp. I don't think the Swamp, it'll just kind of be a puddle by midseason. I don't think anyone will fear going into the Swamp. Certainly Miami didn't, and that was an invigorated Florida crowd. And
yeah, Cam Ward was piling on after the game. The Miami quarterback was making fun of the Swamp and saying, like, this ain't that hostile of a venue. It's like, well, no, it's not when you're blowing out the Gators by halftime and fans are filing out in the third quarter.
I know. And we were talking about we played before more hostile crowds in the Pac-12, a league which no longer exists. I mean, that was the ultimate slam.
All right. We'll leave it there with Florida, John, and move on to one of the brighter moments in the SEC in week 1, Georgia pummeling Clemson on Saturday in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Dabo Swinney and Clemson added 0 transfers in the offseason. Dabo still thinks the year is 2016, and he doesn't need transfers in his program. Well, Georgia showed Clemson what a modern-day program looks like, and that is a program that has really outdistanced itself from Clemson. And Clemson, yeah, I mean, they could still contend for the playoffs. The ACC looks wide open. Florida State's a bust. Miami's the front runner at this point, but Clemson's not out of it. Sure, they can still be the first or second or third best team in the ACC. But the little mini dynasty Dabo built when he was, the best threat of anyone to beat Nick Saban. He did it twice, won 2 national championships, had star quarterbacks in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. I mean, that feels like forever ago now. That mini dynasty is over, and it's not coming back unless Dabo changes his tactics. So my question for you, John, a decade ago, Dabo Swinney vowed that if getting paid, he'd go find something else to do. Well, college athletes now do get paid in NIL, and revenue sharing awaits around the corner. And perhaps Dabo has made his peace with that, but he has not made his peace with the transfer portal. I mentioned Clemson and the service academies were like the only programs who didn't add any transfers in the offseason. And, well, Clemson is not Army or Navy. It's a program in the ACC. So if Dabo doesn't want to get with the program here and join the direction where college football is going, overreaction or smart take, Dabo Swinney at the end of this season should follow Nick Saban into retirement.
Yeah, that's the case. He should. He has to make a decision. He needs to. I mean, they'll leave it up to him. Do you want to do this? Nick Saban, it's seemingly complained about every change in college football. Oh, this is horrible, blah, 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 on and on, all that, whatever came up, he complained about it. And then he immediately, in the very next second, started to figure out, what do I need to do to win with these changes? You can despise the changes, but you got to adapt to them. And Bear Bryant did that for many years at Alabama. Nick Saban did that for years at Alabama. Dabo's not doing that. He's digging in his heels, and that's a very bad move. Dabo could have really helped himself in the portal if he'd have gone out and got him maybe a little bit better quarterback and maybe help some other positions of weakness. And I think Clemson probably has the resources to do that. So Dabo, you're right. He does need to make a decision. I think that's what Nick Saban did. He just finally said, I don't want to deal with this. I can win doing it. I can win, but I don't like it. And I've got 7 national championships on my resume, 6 at Alabama. Why do that? That's the way you do it. So Dabo, just sit down, think about it. If you don't want to have transfers, okay, great. Then go do something else. You got plenty of money. Enjoy your life.
Yeah, I think he's got to decide. I mean, Dabo will be 55 years old at the end of this season. He could coach for another 10 plus years if he wants to. But I think to your point, John, Saban was the greatest at what he did because, yeah, great football mind, great recruiter. But the other thing we know about Saban, he changed with the times. And even if he didn't like the way the direction the sport was going, he would kind of grumble a little bit. He'd say, is this really what we want the sport to be about? And then he would get with the program, right? Like when all these hurry up offenses and RPOs kind of came along, I think Saban wished that genie would be stuffed back in the bottle, the warp speed offenses, but he couldn't do that. And so what did he do? He swallowed his pride. He brought in Lane Kiffin, who installed a little more tempo and certainly installed more RPOs. And Alabama got with the program and won a couple more national championships after modernizing their offense. So, yeah, Dabo has to decide, does he want to coach another 10 years in college football, or does he just not want to swim in these transfer waters? And you can have your principles. That's fine, but you can take your principles right into retirement. And, I don't know, maybe be a Tommy Tuberville and run for office or something. I don't know what else Dabo would do. I don't think he'd be very good on a college game day set. Saban is, but I don't think Dabo's got that personality. So maybe he can run for office if he didn't want to coach football anymore. But what do you think of Georgia on Saturday, John? Because the first half, Georgia's only winning 6-3. Their defense looked just fine. And I thought at halftime, 6 points probably will be enough to win this game. And ultimately it would have been. Clemson scored just a field goal. So the defense was fine wire to wire. The offense sort of took a while to get going. But, boy, when Carson Beck came out of the locker room after halftime, I mean, he was just throwing darts, just pinpoint accuracy as we've come to expect from him. London Humphreys, a transfer, caught a touchdown pass. Colby Young, a transfer, caught a touchdown pass. Dabo, are you listening? And Carson Beck was usual cool hand Carson. I mean, the thing with him is, like, I don't know how many Heisman moments we're going to get from Carson Beck, because he doesn't really need Heisman moments. He doesn't do Heisman moments. He just completes 9-yard passes on 3rd and 6, moves the chains, and scores touchdowns. What was your assessment on Georgia? I thought it was a strong, I wasn't ready to crown him champs yet, but I thought it was a pretty strong performance all told.
Well, we talked about this last week on the podcast about we both expected that game not to be close. It just took Georgia a little longer to get going. And keep in mind, there's some key members of that offense, like Ladd McConkey at wide receiver, Brock Bowers at tight end. Those were integral parts of Georgia's offense last year. And I almost wonder if in the first half, if Carson Beck was thinking, where's Brock? It's 3rd down. Where's Brock? He's not out there. But another thing, I feel like Kirby Smart's the best motivator in college football. And this isn't the first time I've seen his team come out after halftime and say, okay, you're about to see the real Georgia now. That was a warm up. And now here's the real deal. It's almost as though the last few years we've seen it since Georgia won those national championships back to back. It's as though when Georgia gets down to business and it plays up to its standard, nobody comes close. I mean, it just takes over. It just takes over a game. That was a game takeover we saw. I mean, Clemson's kind of hanging in there. There didn't look like there was huge disparity between the teams, but once Georgia came out in the second half, it was game over. Georgia has that extra gear that not many teams have, and they seemingly can just flip a switch and find it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's follow this up, though, after that performance, John, and say, overreaction or smart take, Georgia will lose at least one game during the regular season. And let me remind you who's on the Georgia schedule. They will have to go to Alabama. They go to Texas. And Georgia also goes to Ole Miss. So 3 road games there against top 10 teams. We've discussed how good we think Georgia still is. So is it an overreaction or a smart take to say Georgia will lose a regular season game, or will they go to Atlanta undefeated?
I think they will lose a regular season game just because of what you pointed out, the schedule, the road games. Everybody has a bad day. Who knows? Georgia might win all 3 of those games and then lose a game we didn't see coming. That can happen too. I think it's the best team in the league, most complete team. Keep in mind, Georgia had attrition in that game. It was playing without Janelle Aguero, starting DB. It had 2 running back sidelines. Yeah. And so, and then it got on defensive lineman hurt early in the game, Warren Brinson. So a lot of attrition there. But we're still seeing, despite all the transfer portal activity and all the changes in college football, we're still seeing a different kind of depth at Georgia than what you see at other places. Georgia Kirby Smart is not afraid to play freshmen. He put KJ Bolden in there in place of Aguero, and he had 4 or 5 tackles. So, yeah, it still looks just like Georgia's really good teams.
Yeah, it's interesting. We discussed in the offseason Kirby talking about how I don't have the depth that I used to have. Maybe he doesn't, but he doesn't have to play 2021 and 2022 Georgia on the schedule this year. He's still got more depth than really any program this side of Ohio State. So I agree with you, though. I think with those 3 road games we talked about, they're going to drop one along the way, but still will be well positioned going into the postseason. I don't know how well positioned, though, John, the SEC is going to be going into the postseason after week 1. I would have said and did say all throughout the offseason that I thought the SEC was going to qualify 5 playoff teams. However, we also talked about how important the game in College Station would be, not just to Texas A&M, but to the SEC as a whole. A loss from Notre Dame would have been really damaging to the Irish's playoff chances, while now, after beating Texas A&M by a touchdown in College Station. And Notre Dame's really in the driver's seat to make the playoff and snatch one of those at-large bids. It's a pretty accommodating schedule the rest of the way for the Irish. They will have to play Southern Cal, who beat LSU, but if the Irish can get to 12-0 or even 11-1, I think they're probably a playoff team, which takes a spot away potentially from the SEC. We also saw some potential playoff contenders absorb a loss on the resume already, headlined by LSU losing to Southern Cal, and then Texas A&M, another ranked team from the SEC, has a loss as well. So, John, overreaction or smart take, the SEC, after seeing what we saw in week 1, will qualify 4, but not 5 teams to the playoff.
Smart take. Never mind if it's just one weekend. There were 2 huge games that the SEC lost because they lost to teams that are going to be in the running for large playoff bids in Southern California. Southern Cal is much better than last year. I can see that already. It's got a better defense. Dabo, again, you can't help yourself with transfers. Lincoln Riley did that, and I thought Lincoln Riley outcoached Brian Kelly in that game as well. So you have Southern Cal. You look at Notre Dame with that schedule, it's favored in every other game except maybe that final game against USC. Those teams may both be in the playoff. But definitely, to me, the SEC lost one bid. Because of those games, I couldn't believe how bad A&M looked offensively. Bad day for Mike Elko, its new coach. Jimbo Fisher could have given you that.
Totally agree. And Connor Wigman, wasn't all on him. His receivers struggled to get open against Notre Dame, but rough game for Connor Wigman. He was 12 of 30, and I just thought, why in the world did Mike Elko not at least try Jalen Henderson, the backup quarterback, as a wrinkle? If nothing else, to try to spice up the run game. I mean, maybe it wasn't all on Wigman. Like I said, the receivers were struggling to get separation, but doesn't mean you can't go back to Wigman later in the season. I just thought A&M needed to do something to try to spark its offense, which could not move the ball. And we know Henderson's a good runner, so I can't really explain. I thought it was just a poor move for A&M not to make a quarterback change in that game. Again, doesn't mean you can't change back to Wigman later in the season.
It was the offense was absolutely dreadful. How you can watch that, and it was consistently dreadful. Connor Wigman, yes, receivers were not getting open against that good Notre Dame secondary. A&M needs more speed at receiver. It's got a big receiver, but it needs more speed. Offensive line was getting whipped repeatedly by Notre Dame's defensive front. It could get to Wigman with 4-man rush. But Wigman, even when he completed passes, he didn't look good. He was just off, shaky, and I know his confidence was dropping by the minute. You gotta make a change. You can't worry about, oh, well, I don't know how that'll affect my quarterback. He's been our guy, blah, blah, blah. No, you got to make a change because, as you said, the game was winnable. And you put in a quarterback who's suddenly a running threat, he could make one play that turned that game in your favor, because as bad as A&M was, it still could have won the game. And Mike Elko, I thought of him as a pretty good coach. I didn't think of him as a very good coach in that game.
Yeah, you'll hear no argument for me, John. He got outcoached. A&M got outplayed. The idea of A&M being a playoff sleeper team, I think we can probably forget about that at this point. The offense it's not there, and you got to be able to score if you want to contend for the playoff. And interestingly, John, I thought Notre Dame in week 1 looked more like an SEC team than what LSU did in its loss to Southern Cal. I mean, the Tigers did some good things. Garrett Nussmeier was accurate. The defense was better. I don't know that it was great, but last year was a disaster, so it was a low bar, and the defense was better. But LSU just didn't seem to have that killer instinct. They had chances to put the game away. They couldn't do it. Some of their destruction was self-inflicted. Multiple unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, which were very costly. 10 penalties overall. Brian Kelly blew a fuse afterwards. When it comes to the offense, like, Nussmeier was efficient, But I thought they really missed the big play abilities of not only Jaden Daniels, but Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, those two elite wide receivers last year. I mean, I really can't criticize Nussmeier's performance other than I think, for them to have scoring drives, they kind of had to go 5, 6, 8 yards, little small chunks down the field. Whereas last season, I mean, they could score in a blink of an eye with Jaden Daniels and those two wide receivers. And I think, if this defense is just average, not a disaster, but average, they need the offense to be a little bit more explosive than it was against Southern Cal. Southern Cal, better on defense, but still LSU is going to face better defenses than the one they saw in Las Vegas. So I got an overreaction or smart take queued up. But first, before we get to that, I just want your thoughts on what you saw at LSU and really what was a disappointing opener for them, I thought, all told.
Well, I was so impressed by what Garrett Nussmeier did. I mean, I thought pretty highly of him coming in. I know he's not Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels is going to start as a rookie in the NFL. He doesn't have that athleticism or running ability. I think of Garrett Nussmeier as a first-round NFL draft pick. I would, if I were an NFL team, I wouldn't have any problem taking him with my number 1 pick. Great arm. He made really good decisions. They always try to cast him as a gunslinger. He'll try and fit a pass in the tightest of windows. I thought his judgment was great in that game. He didn't force stuff. He checked down when he needed to. He made some really accurate throws. He just didn't have enough help. LSU's supposed to have both offensive tackles are supposed to be first-round picks. 4 starters back in the offensive line. Southern Cal got the best of it too many times up front, and LSU couldn't run the ball. John Emery gave it a boost in the 4th quarter, but the other 2 running backs, I expected more from Caleb Jackson as a running back. So that, to me, was where LSU lost a game, and you could see it early. When LSU drove the length of the field and got on the 2-yard line and didn't make that touchdown, it went for it on 4th down. I just thought, I know there's plenty of game left to play, but this is something LSU should be able to do against my last memory of Southern Cal, a porous defense like LSU's last year, but here they are. This is a different defense. And LSU, with those first-round picks and its offensive line, it couldn't budge them when it mattered. So I think those were 2 really good teams. But back to Brian Kelly, I think Lincoln Riley outcoached him in that game.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, John. And Kelly was furious afterwards at the lack of discipline that his team showed. I mean, really just too many costly penalties. I thought LSU had enough talent to win that game, and even without some of the big plays that I mentioned that they didn't have, that we kind of came to expect last year from Jaden Daniels. I thought Nussmeier was solid. He was good enough. He didn't get enough help, and really, some of those penalties were really costly. And I think, Brian Kelly deserves some blame too. I mean, I think back to a 3rd and 1, really a critical moment. LSU had a chance to score. I think it would have been a 2-score lead if they could have extended that drive and got a touchdown. 3rd and 1, they hurry up to the line and zone read right into a wall of defenders. And I thought, boy, I know, we've seen LSU, we've seen Notre Dame dial up some great plays with Brian Kelly as a coach. But I mean, how predictable is that? You hurry up to the line on 3rd and 1. You really haven't been running it very well all game, and you run zone read right into the line and get stuffed. And so, yeah, not enough coaching, not enough discipline. More principled team won, and that's not something you could always say about Southern Cal over years being the more principled, the more disciplined team. But when it comes to Brian Kelly, John, this is year 3. I'm not saying he's facing any kind of long-term heat, but I think there's a lot of frustrations right now with him losing 3 straight season openers. So overreaction or smart take, Brian Kelly will never win a national championship.
I think that might be a smart take. And the reason I say that, because I've always thought Brian Kelly would win a national championship there. And he's certainly recruiting toward that goal now. But he couldn't control his team in that game.
No.
And those guys look hard to control. And you could say that about some other LSU teams in the past. but that was a very undisciplined team. And Kelly's been there for 3 years. Is he enforcing discipline? He's saying, you can't play like that and play for us. You're on the bench now. He's got to do that. He's not coaching the same kind of players he coached in Notre Dame, and he's got to make that adjustment, or no, he won't win a national championship.
That's right. And like I said, I mean, Kelly called it ridiculous afterwards and many other criticisms, but he has to take responsibility. And he acknowledged that, but it's not enough to say it. He has to deliver the message. And you know, he came to LSU with the reputation of being a guy who kind of preached disciplined football. And I'm just wondering if maybe that reputation for being a disciplinarian, playing principled ball, maybe there's more of a credit to his players at Notre Dame than it was all about Brian Kelly, because we didn't see that level of discipline, certainly, in the first game of Brian Kelly's third season. John, what we saw out of Texas was a program that has not one, but two good quarterbacks. And I know you've been kind of itching to see more of Arch Manning. I think a lot of Texas fans were itching to see more of Arch Manning. Steve Sarkisian obliged in this rout of Colorado State. Manning threw a touchdown pass. He was 5 of 6. Quinn Ewers was solid as well. He threw for 260 yards and 3 touchdowns. You know, there's not every quarterback, not every program can say in this era of college football that they got not one but 2 quarterbacks who could lead the team to the playoffs. Quarterback depth, as we know, in the transfer era is a little bit more difficult, but I think either of these guys for Texas could quarterback a playoff team. So my question for you, though, is with all the buzz behind Arch, all the talent and the name behind him, smart take or overreaction? By Thanksgiving, Arch Manning will be Texas's starting quarterback. Reaction.
I'll say smart take. I think he's a better quarterback than Quinn Ewers. I know I've only seen snippets of him, and I think Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback. And I think Texas has a lot of complementary talent. But Steve Sarkisian, if you're running a program like Texas, you've got the overall talent you've got. You're expected to compete for national championship, and you're an offensive guy. Steve Sarkisian at some point has to look at that and say, I think Arch is better. What would this offense look like with him? If he's as good of an offensive coach as his resume says he is, he'll make that decision at some point in the season.
This one might be the toughest one I've posed, John. I probably lean toward Quinn Ewers still being the quarterback at Thanksgiving, which that timeline, I throw that out there because that would be ahead of the Texas A&M game, and which could be, you know, make or break for Texas' playoff chances, depending what happens for Texas this week against Michigan. And then they have Oklahoma and Georgia later on the schedule. That might be a must-win game for Texas A&M. When in doubt, I think coaches, even smart offensive minds, they fall back on the veteran guy, and they're hesitant to make a quarterback change unless they feel like they have to. So I don't know. I might lean Ewers still being the quarterback by the end of the regular season, but I could see this one going either way. And it may come down to, does Texas beat Michigan this week with Quinn Ewers as its starting quarterback? If they do, then it might be pretty hard to unseat him as quarterback if he goes on the road and beats the defending national champions. A little bit watered down though they may be, still a top 10 program in Ann Arbor. I don't know if I see a quarterback change if Texas wins this week.
Well, I'll look beyond the Michigan game. I'll look against 2 SEC defenses, Georgia and Oklahoma. If Texas loses one of those games and the offense doesn't play well, I think that creates an opportunity for Arch to show what he can do. And who knows? Maybe it is a tough question. And the nature of a coach is not to disrupt things. He doesn't look at changing a quarterback the way he does changing his left offensive guard.
Right.
It disrupts team chemistry. You've anointed this player as your leader on the field. You communicating with him now in his ear. So it's a very tough call. But I remember when Dabo Swinney did that. We've knocked Dabo, so let's give Dabo a little credit for putting Trevor Lawrence, the freshman, in. I've already forgotten the quarterback's name that started the first 4 games for Clemson that year.
Kelly Bryant, right? Who later
That's
transferred to Missouri,
Kelly
I think.
Bryant. Yeah. And so that he knew that was a decision that had to be made. Now, this would be a tougher call because Quinn Ewers is a better quarterback than Kelly Bryant was, but still, when I watch it, Arch Manning really passes the eye test. When I see these brief appearances of him, just the way he handles himself, and you can't help think about the genetics in play here. I mean, you're talking about Super Bowl winning quarterbacks with Eli and Peyton. So think of it this way. If you're X university anywhere in the country right now, and you could sign any quarterback you want because you've got $10 million in NIL money to give a quarterback, would you take Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning?
Probably Arch, but I just don't know if coaches are going to make their lineup decisions that way. But maybe they should. I'm not saying that I disagree with the premise that perhaps a change will be made. I'm just always skeptical that a coach will do it. But, I think pretty highly of Steve Sarkisian as a coach, so maybe he will prove me right and make a change if one does need to be made for Texas to win a national championship. Like, that's the thing. I think they can make the playoff with either of these guys at quarterback. But if we go beyond just making the playoff and trying to win a national championship, if it becomes apparent that Arch Manning gives you a better chance, then do the smart thing and the difficult thing and make the change at some point later this season. But we'll get a better idea for that maybe based on this week's performance against Michigan. And so, let's transition, John, into the picks portion of our podcast here as we close our records last week. I went 3-2. You went 2-3. The difference was I hit my lock. You missed your lock. So I got a 1-game lead, but still quite early here. And I got a few games dialed up for us, and then we'll close with our lock of the week. So we've been talking about Texas. So let's just stay there. Game I'll be covering on Saturday. Texas, a 7-point favorite at Michigan. Why don't you start us off, John? Who are you taking in that one?
I'm taking Texas. I just think it has a better roster. It has a better coach, and it has a better quarterback. It doesn't matter which one starts. I really like Texas in this game. I know much will be made of the home field advantage of playing in the, quote, big house. Michigan wasn't overly impressive in his opener. It's lost its head coach, Jim Harbaugh, and it's lost its sign-stealing coordinator and Connor Stallion. Just not the same program. So I like Texas to cover there.
I agree. I think the difference at quarterback, regardless of which one Texas is playing, will be the obvious difference among others in this game. So I will take Texas not only to win, but to cover. Important game for Sam Pittman this week, John, as he looks to navigate this season and retain his job. I think we will know a lot more about what direction that is headed after this weekend's game. Arkansas will be at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, a 7.5-point favorite. I'll get us going on this one. I'm going to take Arkansas and the points. Feel a little bit nervous about this pick because I don't know what to make of Arkansas yet. I know they made a lot of changes within the program. Bobby Petrino, now the offensive coordinator, new quarterback there as well with Taylon Green. Arkansas looked just fine in its opener, but we can't get any read off of that because they were playing a very weak FCS team. So this is really going to be a tell of the tape game for Arkansas and probably for the health of Sam Pittman's job security there. So I don't know, maybe you can help me explain it, but I'm taking Arkansas and 7.5 points against Oklahoma State. Which direction are you going?
I'm going the other way. I watched Arkansas beat Arkansas at Pine Bluff. Wasn't really familiar with that institution of higher learning, but I wish them well. That was one of the lamest teams I've ever seen on an SEC field. So I don't know what to make of that game. I do know that last year Arkansas had trouble running the ball. and it had no trouble running the ball in this game. So I think it was more of the competition. It added some transfers in the offensive line, got one from Tennessee, got a player, 2 years ago, Josh Braun from Florida. I still do. Arkansas has quarterback shape. Taylor Green is a really good runner. He's very fast, 6'6", long strides. I just don't know if he can throw the ball well enough consistently against a better team. So Oklahoma State's got Ollie Gordon to run the ball. I like Mike Gundy as a coach. He's not on the hot seat. No. And I would give those points there.
Okay, so we got our first difference there. I do think Oklahoma State will win, but I'll take the 7.5 points and ride with Arkansas. We'll see where we're going on this one. Tennessee, haven't mentioned Nico Iamaleava's performance. I know it was Chattanooga, but Iamaleava passed the eye test. He didn't just pass it, he aced it in Tennessee's rout of Chattanooga in week 1. Meanwhile, NC State, it had its hands full with Western Carolina, won the game, but did not blow out Western Carolina and maybe necessarily inspire a lot of confidence ahead of this game against Tennessee. Tennessee 7.5-point favorites. Josh Heupel, if he has the opportunity, will always extend the lead, pad the stats, cover the spread. Heupel's usually a pretty good bet to cover the spread. I loved what I saw from Iamaleava. I know you were at that game, John, so you could further the conversation there. But I am picking Tennessee not only to win, but to cover the 7.5 points.
Yeah, I agree with that. Nico, I mean, I had really high expectations for him. If I were an NFL owner and I could take any quarterback in college right now, I'd take Nico. I wouldn't give it a second thought. He has everything you want in a quarterback. He's tall, big, can run, elusive. You watch him in that game. I know he's playing inferior competition, but you watched him go through he went through his progressions. They always talk about a quarterback having to go through their progressions. He did it very quickly, and he threw the ball into tight windows. Tennessee was reluctant to throw over the middle last year with Joe Milton. It had no qualms about throwing over the middle with Nico because he's so accurate. That release, you just don't see many guys with that quick of a release. He gets the ball out across field or for a bubble screen or to a running back coming out of the backfield. He gives them a chance to make a move because he gets rid of the ball so quickly. I just think this guy's awesome. I watched NC State. Western Carolina was just as good as NC State. It led after 3 quarters. The rosters obviously aren't as deep with SCF's programs. They don't have as many scholarships. That's the only reason NC State won that game. It just wore down Western Carolina. I think NC State is in a world of trouble against Tennessee. So I'll give the points.
Yeah, and if Tennessee wins this game, especially if they win this game, with authority, then the idea of Tennessee as a playoff team is really going to pick up some momentum. I know that's a space you've been operating in for months now, John. I think you've been really high on Nico throughout the preseason. You've been in on the idea of Tennessee as a playoff team. We're going to know a lot more about that after this. I don't see how it's a playoff team if they lose to NC State. You're not clinching a spot by any means by winning, but you look at what's ahead on the schedule. A lot would then be riding on Tennessee's Week 4 game at Oklahoma. If Tennessee can navigate this month of September undefeated, beat NC State, beat Oklahoma, then I think that idea of Vols to the playoff is really going to gain some steam. One more, John, before we get to our lock of the week. How about a conference game? South Carolina, 1-0. We got them down at number 16 in our power rankings, but hey, South Carolina's got to win. LSU, Texas A&M, and Florida don't. Now South Carolina, though, is going to go to Kentucky. Kentucky had some trouble with the weather. Had no trouble handling Southern Miss in Brock Vandegrift's debut as Kentucky's quarterback. Kentucky, a 10.5-point favorite. Where are you going with this one, John?
This is the toughest pick for us. I think South Carolina is just awful. Its defense isn't that bad from what I saw. I don't like to – well, that's right. I'm not actually putting money on this. I thought I don't like putting money on Kentucky. Well, I don't have to put money on Kentucky, so I'll just take Kentucky and give the 10.5 points. And if I lose a game to you, so be it, but it doesn't cost me any cash.
Just shooting from the hip there, John.
Yeah, it's they've got a better quarterback. Kentucky does. Playing at home should be an advantage, but I don't really trust Kentucky.
All right, just for funsies though, you're taking Kentucky to cover the 10.5.
Yeah.
I'll take South Carolina on the points. I like Kentucky to win, but I'm not sure how much history should be a guide, but in so much as it is, games between South Carolina and Kentucky are usually decided by 10 points or fewer. Last 3 years been pretty low scoring games. Last year, South Carolina won 17-14, I believe it was. So, yeah, I think Kentucky wins. I'm interested to see more of Brock Vandagriff, see if Kentucky's, finally got an upper end of the conference quarterback. But I think they win this one. But I think it's somewhat close based on the history of the series. And I think, like you said, South Carolina's defense, I trust it a little bit more than the offense. So maybe they can at least keep it close. So we got another difference there. Now to the lock of the week, John. I had no trouble hitting last week by my showing confidence in BYU against the SIU Salukis. And this week, I'm going to pick on another team that I think just isn't in the league of Power 4 opponent. Now but Akron. Akron is getting 21.5 points against Rutgers. Well, that's fine. Rutgers is going to win going away here. So I will take Rutgers to crush Akron to cover the 21.5, and maybe we'll be talking about Rutgers as a playoff dark horse next time this week after they leave no doubt against the Zips.
Well, we know this from last week that Coach Greg Schiano with the Rutgers will not take a knee when the goal line is nearby. He's going.
I like that too. In covered.
Yeah, that's good. And I got, what I find myself, I'm horrible in these lock of the weeks. Last week I had West Virginia as a lock. What was I thinking? I mean, Penn State just steamrolled it in the second half. I think it was an 8.5 point spread. So wrong about that. I'm often wrong in these games. And what I usually find myself doing is going back and overreacting to whatever happened the previous week. And true to the scouting report on my picks, I'll do the same thing this time, and I'll take Ole Miss against how many ever points it has to give against MTSU. Lane Kiffin, a great offensive coach. Jackson Dart, he just keeps getting better. And Ole Miss has a pretty good backup quarterback too. Lane Kiffin's not shy about running up points. I think he realizes in this playoff era, style points will matter. You put up a couple of 70s early in the year, people remember that, and they remember what you did in September when you hit 70. So I'll give the points, and I will go with, I think, 41, and I'll go with Ole Miss.
Yeah, 41-point spread, but Ole Miss beat Furman 76-0 in week 1. Lane Kiffin falls into that Josh Heupel category. They run very similar offenses, and they have a very similar mindset. They're not shy about covering the spread. I don't know if they would admit to looking at it, but I think they know what it is, and I think if they have an opportunity, they want to send the bettors home happy who picked their team to cover the spread. All right, well, Vanderbilt fans they should be feeling happy after John's apology. We will see where the Commodores go with the season, and we'll continue to monitor the SEC's quest to get 5 teams into the playoff. Doesn't look so hot right now after week 1. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.